Before I begin experimenting with strokes, color, swatches, and effects, there's one more thing I'd like to show you. In this case, I changed this image to a circular frame where I then put in this picture, and now what I'd like to do is I'd like to show you the Type on a Path tool. The Type on a Path tool is nested beneath the Type tool, and if you click on the Type on a Path tool and you set your cursor next to an object that you want to type around, then you can start actually including text around an object. In this case, I'm going to include the caption, "Attention all full-time marketing and advertising students." I'm going to select this text. I'm going to go over here and I'm going to change the text format to impact, and I'm going to change the size of it maybe to 24, and maybe I'll go a little bit higher to 30. Okay, so I'm not saying that this is something that you want to do, but again, this is another device that you may like or dislike depending on how your layout is. But that's how you use the Type on a Path tool. Now the next thing I'd like to show you is how to create a stroke around an image or around an object. I'm going to go ahead and click on this item here. I'm going to click on the stroke dialog box, and here this allows me to do a variety of things. I can set the weight, I can align the stroke using different techniques, I can select a different type of stroke, and I can have it start and end at a particular area. Now this is something that you really do need to experiment with. Just to begin, I'm going to change around the weight so that you can see just how, as I'm bumping up the weight to different points, how different the weight looks on this particular item. If I click off, you can see here that I've got a black stroke around my image. If I go ahead and change the align stroke from center to outside, you can see how it changes where that stroke is placed. So depending on how much space inside your image you want to take up or outside your composition you want to use, that is something that you're going to want to take into account. Take a look at what happens when you align the stroke to the inside. Now let's take a look at the different types. If I change it from a solid to, let's say, this triple line, you can see how it changes the appearance of that particular box. One thing I would caution you in is that whatever you do to one image, you really do want to be consistent with across the board with all of your images. Otherwise, it ends up looking very amateurish and can be a little bit overwhelming. In this case, I think the type I'm just going to stick to is just the solid to demonstrate. What I would like to do is I would like to change the stroke color. So if I go over here and I double click on the stroke line, I get the dialog box, the color picker dialog box, which allows me to select either manually from within any number of colors that show up within the color space view, or I can dial in specific RGB, LAB, or CMYK colors. In this case, the client has provided me with CMYK colors that I can switch to and create a color swatch with. So in this case, I'm going to select one of the blues, which is 100, 55, 0, 75. Now before I click OK, I'm going to add this as a CMYK swatch so that I don't have to keep dialing in this color every single time. So I'm going to say OK. Now I can see that I've changed the swatch color. Here are the color of the stroke around the actual object, and I can do that with any number of things. For example, if I wanted to go in here and click on the Type tool, I can go in and highlight this text, and I can do the same thing. If I look over here, I can see that the T is within this little box. If I click on the T, I get another dialog box here, and I can select another one of my corporate colors. So here, let's say instead of my color blue 1, I'm going to try blue 2, which is 95, 0, 23, 0. And here is my second corporate color. I'm going to add to CMYK swatch, and I'm going to click OK. Now I can see that I have two corporate colors represented. I also need to have something here with a little bit of the orange. All of my corporate colors need to be represented. So just for the sake of having a representation, I'm going to go ahead here. I'm going to click on my rectangle tool. I'm going to just draw a rectangle around my composition. I'm going to go into stroke. I'm going to bump up the point a little bit. And I think here, just for the sake of it, I'm going to go over here and select the final color, which is an orange. So 0, 72, 100, 0. I'm going to add to CMYK swatch. I'm going to say OK. I now have all of my colors represented, but I'm noticing that some elements of my composition are running into others. So let's go up here to layers, and now I can start playing around with the organization of what goes in front of what. Now if you take a look at this layers panel, it looks an awful lot like the layers panel in Photoshop. So if I want to figure out what is which layer, all I need to use is these eyes to wink on and off to determine what is what. So in this case, I know that this layer, I want it to go up a level so that it's over top of the orange as opposed to being underneath the orange. And all I did was drag and drop. And now I can see that the image and the writing are above this orange line. Okay, so now I've applied some color, I've applied a little bit of all three corporate colors, and now what I want to do is I want to play around a little bit now with adding more color. One thing I'd like to show you is your swatches. Let's say, for example, I wanted to fill this rectangle, just for the sake of showing you how to do it, with an existing color swatch. Here I have the color orange as my stroke, but let's say I wanted to fill this object with one of my color swatches here. InDesign has provided me with some existing color swatches of some popular colors. It's given me swatches based on the Word document that I brought in, and if I scroll down, I can see that the colors that I created just recently, my blue 1, my blue 2, and the orange. Let's say I want to fill that here with the cyan color. I'm just going to do that. And I can see here it's really overpowering. What I want to do is I'm going to go down to my layers now, click, drag, and drop my rectangle to the bottom. And now I really, looking at that, I'm thinking that is really overpowering. Now I'm going to go over to my gradient feather tool, and I'm going to click from one corner to the other. Do you see how the feather tool has changed the orientation? Now it goes from full intensity to low intensity. I'm going to Control Z. I'm going to try the same thing from the other direction. So I'm going to click, drag, and drop from corner to corner, and I can see here that I've kind of played around a little bit with that background color. It's also made this part here a little more legible. All right, so let's look at some other ways that we can play around with this particular document. Let's take a look at some of the effects that we can have. I'm going to go over here, I'm going to select this image, and I'm going to click on FX. Click on the actual object effects, which is this FX box down here. Here what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and change and create this drop shadow. I'm going to bump this up a bit, and I'm going to click on preview. This is going to allow me to see what it looks like. Now this writing is already hard to read, so I really want to be very careful about where I place my shadow. And I can do that by changing the angle. Do you see as I'm rotating this around, it's actually changing the angle? I can also change the distance. I could be very dramatic with it. I can change the opacity from 75% down to just making it a slight shadow where I've got an opacity of 50%. If I was happy with that, I would just click OK, or I could cancel. I'm just going to say OK for now. Here's another interesting effect that I can do. I'll click on OCMC, my title here, and I can go over to Effects, and I can dial down the opacity. All I need to do is click on opacity at 100% and start dialing it down, and see how a little bit of change can change the feel of a picture. Now go ahead and play around with some of the effects that you've got here and see how you can change the look and appearance of your poster just by making some slight changes to the stroke, color, swatches, and effects.